Last Action Hero and Jurassic Park.
This is really taxing and challenging work physically, but we're having so much fun.
This one should have been impossible to screw up. You've got Brian De Palma directing, coming off The Untouchables. You've got Tom Hanks, you've got Bruce Willis, fresh off Die Hard, you've got Melanie Griffith. And you've got the source material, Tom Wolfe's novel, one of the biggest bestsellers of the 80s. Every single ingredient was premium level here. The studio spent $47 million putting all that talent together, and audiences looked at the finished product and just walked past it. The movie grossed $15.6 million. All those famous faces on the poster, and people simply did not care. That became the theme of the decade. A star can open a movie, but a star can't make people want a movie. The studios needed a few more bombs before they figured that out. And pay attention to Bruce Willis here because he's about to have a very rough couple of years. The poster for Hudson Hawk said "Catch the Hawk," like the Hawk was somebody everyone already knew. He wasn't. Hudson Hawk wasn't from a book or a comic or an old TV show. He was a brand new character invented for this movie, but the marketing sold him like he was Batman. The entire campaign assumed America already loved this guy and America had never heard of him. So of course, nobody showed up. This was Bruce Willis again, 1 year after Bonfire of the Vanities. He was supposed to be untouchable after Die Hard, and instead he's headlining back-to-back disasters. Hudson Hawk cost $65 million. It was a massive budget for 1991 and grossed $17 million. One of the worst performances of any Willis movie since he became a star. The budget had spiraled so far out of control during production that the movie needed a miracle just to break even. That miracle never came. Now the weird one. People actually like this movie. The reviews were good. That almost never happens with a bomb this size because usually a flop gets torn apart from every direction. Not this one. Dustin Hoffman starring, critics liked it, and it still ended up the biggest money loser of 1992. The problem was the budget. Hero was a tribute to the goofy old comedies of the 40s and 50s. Movies like that are small and charming, and they make small, charming money. Somebody decided to spend $42 million on it anyway. That's blockbuster money for a movie that was never going to be a blockbuster. It grossed $66 million, which for a modest comedy would be fine, but not when you've spent $42 million before marketing even starts. The budget turned a perfectly decent movie into a financial loser. In the early 90s, Schwarzenegger was the biggest movie star on the planet. Terminator 2, Total Recall, Kindergarten Cop, the man printed money. So when the studio put $85 million behind Last Action Hero, a big action comedy built entirely around Arnold, it looked like a sure thing. And then somebody checked the release calendar. Last Action Hero opened exactly 1 week after Jurassic Park, and Jurassic Park wasn't just a hit. It was breaking every box office record that existed. Every ticket, every screen, every kid in America. It was all dinosaurs. And into that buzzsaw walks Arnold Schwarzenegger with a movie that critics didn't like anyway. It made $137 million worldwide, which sounds okay until you remember it cost $85 million. And Arnold's movies were supposed to do double that. It became one of the first Schwarzenegger vehicles to actually lose serious money. Rob Reiner had been on one of the great runs any director ever had. He made The Princess Bride, then When Harry Met Sally, then Misery, then A Few Good Men. One hit after another. To this day, he's one of only 2 directors in history with 3 movies rated A+ on CinemaScore. And then he made North, once again starring Bruce Willis. North cost $40 million. It grossed $7.1 million worldwide. People hated it, critics hated it. It's the movie that made Roger Ebert so angry he built a whole review around how much he hated it. Most bombs I'm going to be talking about are just expensive mistakes. The studio takes the loss, and then everybody moves on. But North actually broke something. Reiner's hot streak ended right there, and it never came back. In 1995, Carolco Pictures decided to make a big pirate movie with Gina Davis and Matthew Modine. They spent $98 million on it, which was insane money back then for a movie that wasn't based on any famous property. This wasn't an adaptation of some bestseller with a built-in audience. It was an original pirate adventure that the studio just believed in. Now here's what you need to know about Carolco. By the time Cutthroat Island hit theaters, the studio had already filed for bankruptcy. That happened a month before the movie came out. So the film that was supposed to save them hadn't even opened yet, and they were already dead. Then it opened. $18.5 million worldwide against a $98 million budget. The studio died right then and there, but the damage went way past it. After Cutthroat Island, every studio in Hollywood decided pirate movies were poison. Nobody would touch it for years. This one's interesting because the Washington Post basically called it before it happened. Right before the movie came out, they wrote that if Mary Reilly failed, it wouldn't be some historic disaster like Heaven's Gate or Howard the Duck. It would just be a small failure, a disappointment for filmmakers who meant well. They were wrong. It was way worse. Mary Reilly was a romantic drama that cost $47 million. It made $12.9 million. The release kept getting delayed, word got out about problems behind the scenes, and by the time the movie finally showed up, its reputation was already trashed. And then TriStar just gave up on it. Opening weekend, they put Mary Reilly in 1,470 theaters. Almost every other movie in the top 10 that weekend was playing in more locations than that. The studio spent $47 million on this thing and then released it like they were embarrassed by it. Which, to be fair, they probably were. In 1997, if you told a studio executive you had a comedy starring Robin Williams and Billy Crystal, they would have started counting the money. These were two of the most reliable comedy stars on the planet. Father's Day made $35.6 million on an $85 million budget. The reviews were dismal and the premise felt like something people had seen 100 times before. But the release date is what really buried it. Warner Brothers opened Father's Day 1 week after the first Austin Powers movie, so it walked straight into the hottest comedy of the year. And they released a movie called Father's Day a full month before the actual holiday. I have no idea what they were thinking there. It ended up being Robin Williams' worst-performing star vehicle since Toys 5 years earlier. For Billy Crystal, it was the third worst of his entire career. Two guys who basically never missed, and this one movie dragged them both down. Michael Keaton plays a dad who dies and comes back to life as his son's snowman. That's the actual plot of this movie. Your dad is dead, but don't worry, now he's a snowman. And the snowman was the problem. Warner Brothers built him with CGI, and instead of looking warm and huggable, he looked creepy. Christmas movies are supposed to give you characters like Kris Kringle from Miracle on 34th Street. This one gave kids a talking snowman with their dead father's voice, and it scared them. Warner spent $85 million on this. It made $34.5 million worldwide. The competition didn't help either. It opened in December 1998 against The Prince of Egypt and A Bug's Life, and those were the two family movies kids actually wanted to see. So it just got buried immediately. This one goes back to Jurassic Park. That movie came from a Michael Crichton novel and became the biggest thing on the planet, so the studios drew the obvious conclusion: Crichton books equal money. So they spent the rest of the 90s adapting everything the man had ever written. The 13th Warrior was based on his novel Eaters of the Dead, with Antonio Banderas starring as a traveling poet. The budget was a staggering $125 million. It came out in August 1999 and made $61.7 million worldwide, less than half its budget. And that was the end of the Crichton Gold Rush. The idea that any Crichton adaptation would automatically become the next Jurassic Park died right there, and the 13th Warrior ended up one of the biggest losses of the decade. Back in 2000, Fox had its own animation studio and they were trying to build something that could stand up to Disney. Their best weapon was Don Bluth. Don Bluth was animation royalty. This is the guy who made An American Tail and Anastasia, one of the few animation directors whose name alone could sell a movie. So Fox handed him a sci-fi epic, put $75 million behind it, and waited for their hit. The movie opened in June and made $36 million worldwide. A few weeks later, Fox shut the animation studio down. The people working there barely had time to read the box office numbers before they were out of a job. Years afterward, Chris Meledandri, who was running Fox Animation at the time, finally put a number on the damage. He said the movie lost $100 million. A year later came Final Fantasy, and this one failed in a much weirder way. In America, cartoons are for kids. There's some adult cartoons that get made, stuff like Fritz the Cat, but they sell themselves on being outrageous, on rubbing your face in the fact that they're not for children. The Spirits Within wasn't playing that game. It was a straight, serious science fiction film that happened to be animated, and the studio poured $137 million into it. A huge chunk of that money went into creating digital humans that looked completely real. And that turned out to be the problem. Audiences looked at these almost real digital people and found them creepy instead of impressive. The closer the characters got to looking human, the less people wanted to watch them. The timing made it worse because theaters had suddenly filled up with action cartoons. Titan had just come out, Atlantis: The Lost Empire arrived around the same time, and a serious animated sci-fi had nothing left to stand out with. It finished at $85 million worldwide. Eddie Murphy has had some epic hits and epic fails, but nothing compares to what happened in 2002. The Adventures of Pluto Nash was a science fiction comedy with a $100 million budget, and most of that money went into building the movie's futuristic world, all the sets and costumes around Murphy. None of it ended up mattering because when the movie came out, critics tore it apart with some of the ugliest reviews of his career. Word spread fast, and people just skipped this one entirely. It made $7.1 million worldwide. People like to point at Meet Dave as Murphy's big flop, but next to Pluto Nash, Meet Dave looks like the Nutty Professor. Summer 2003, two animated movies hit theaters. One of them was Finding Nemo, which made $940 million. The other was Sinbad Legend of the Seven Seas from DreamWorks, released right before the 4th of July. It made about $80 million on a $60 million budget, which sounds survivable until you see the real damage. DreamWorks lost $125 million on this movie. And the money wasn't even the worst part. Sinbad was hand-drawn, the traditional way, artists drawing frame by frame. After it flopped, DreamWorks looked at those numbers and made a decision. Never again. They have not made a single hand-drawn film since. 23 years and counting. Remember the Alamo is one of the most famous phrases in American history. So in 2004, a studio figured a big movie about the actual battle would sell tickets. Nobody agrees on what the movie actually cost. The official budget was $107 million. Some trades pushed it to $125, and even that figure is lower than the truth. Whatever the real number was, the movie made $25.8 million against it. Two things killed it. First, and this is the part the studio apparently never checked, movies about the Alamo have always bombed. There's a whole track record of them failing, sitting right there in box office history. Second, the Alamo came out while The Passion of the Christ was steamrolling everything in theaters. So there was nothing left over for a war movie nobody even asked for. Somewhere at Columbia in the early 2000s, somebody looked at the numbers and saw two things that never fail. People love Top Gun. People love robots. So they put them together and got Stealth, a movie about fighter pilots going up against a rogue AI jet. They spent $135 million on it. Josh Lucas got the lead, which was a rare shot at leading man status for him. Jessica Biel signed on, and they landed Jamie Foxx right after he won the Oscar for Ray. So you've got a fresh Oscar winner, a big budget, and a cushy July release date. Everything a summer blockbuster is supposed to have. It made $79 million worldwide against a $135 million budget. The marketing was so generic that people couldn't tell what the movie even was, and the ones who could figure it out just didn't want it. A year later, it was Warner's turn, and the logic here was even harder to argue with. A ship in trouble on the open sea had worked twice before. The original was a hit back in '72. Titanic became the biggest movie ever made by sinking a ship. Warner figured there was still money in a capsized ocean liner, so they spent $160 million to flip one over. Then the Da Vinci Code came out, and that movie ate the entire summer. Everyone had either read the book or was arguing about it, and they all bought tickets to see what the fuss was about. Meanwhile, Poseidon had a giant wave flipping a cruise ship upside down, and nobody cared. The whole country was next door watching Tom Hanks chase the Holy Grail. Poseidon closed at $181 million worldwide. Sounds almost fine, right? It's not. Theaters keep about half of every ticket, and marketing comes on top of the budget. So Warner lost a fortune on this thing. Bruce Almighty made $484 million, so of course Universal wanted a sequel. There was just one tiny problem though. Jim Carrey said no. So they looked around and landed on Steve Carell. He had a supporting part in the first one and had just blown up with the 40-year-old virgin. And look, people liked Carell. But liking a guy and paying to see him carry $175 million biblical comedy are two different things. Think about that for a second. The sequel without the star cost twice as much as the original with the star. Evan Almighty made $174 million worldwide. It grossed less than its own budget. It pulled in about 40% of what Bruce Almighty made while costing double. It was dead the day they signed off on that budget. 2008 gave us the bomb with the best excuse. Speed Racer was the Wachowskis' first movie after the Matrix trilogy, and Warner figured that name alone could open a film. So they put up $120 million for an anime adaptation and marketed the hell out of it. And you know what? That wasn't even a crazy bet. The release date was the crazy part. Speed Racer opened against Iron Man. The exact weekend the Marvel Cinematic Universe was born, Warner rolled out a family movie based on a cartoon most Americans had never even heard of. You can guess how that went. $93 million worldwide on a $120 million budget. This one's my personal favorite because Disney walked into this one with their eyes wide open. Back in 2004, Robert Zemeckis made The Polar Express. It was a motion capture Christmas movie that cost $165 million. To this day, it still hasn't doubled that number at the box office. It barely broke even. And that is the movie Disney decided to copy. They wanted their own dark motion capture Christmas movie, so they hired the same director, handed him A Christmas Carol and $200 million. And they got the same result. They copied a movie that barely made money, spent more making the copy, and lost more because of it. A Christmas Carol made $325 million, which is basically Polar Express money, except on a bigger budget. The LA Times figured Disney lost somewhere between $50 and $100 million on it. When a movie loses a mountain of money, it's usually some giant summer blockbuster full of robots and explosions. That's not what happened in 2010. How Do You Know was a romantic comedy with no effects and no action scenes, just people talking, and it cost $120 million. So how does a movie about people talking end up costing that much? You hire the most expensive people available and you pay every one of them full price. $50 million of that budget went straight into salaries for the cast and the people behind the camera. And to be fair, the man they were paying to direct was James L. Brooks, who had made real hits before. As Good as It Gets was his. He had a real track record of turning people talking in rooms into serious money. So Sony opened the checkbook and stuffed the movie with the biggest stars they could get. It came out in December 2010, and when every ticket on the planet was counted, the movie had made $48.6 million. The entire world's box office came in under what they'd paid the actors. Disney animated movies don't flop. That was basically a law of nature back then. Kids love them, parents buy the toys, everybody gets rich. Then in March 2011, Disney released Mars Needs Moms. They spent $150 million on it. The whole thing was built around motion capture. That's when real actors perform everything in special suits and computers turn their movements into animated characters. For the lead, a young boy, they gave that job to Seth Green, an adult actor. When the movie came out, the two things people went after hardest were the comedy, which didn't land, and that casting choice. It made $39 million worldwide. The Hollywood Reporter didn't even wait for the run to finish. They announced right then that Mars Needs Moms would go down as one of the biggest money losers in the history of movies. And they were right. There was a time when John Carter was a big name in science fiction. He was a character from books that helped invent the whole genre. Ask anyone in the movie business what that name means today, and you'll get a very different answer. This was Disney again, 1 year after Mars Needs Moms, and this time they spent $250 million. Then somewhere along the way, they got cold feet about their own movie. They started stripping the science fiction out of the advertising, and they even cut the title down. From John Carter of Mars to just John Carter. So their massive space epic went out into the world sounding like a movie about a regular guy, John Carter. Could be your accountant. Could be your dentist. It made $284 million worldwide. Disney ended up taking a $200 million write-down, and that's what the name means now. When an expensive movie bombs today, people in the industry call it a John Carter. Disney saw this one coming. They actually saw it coming 2 years early, and they made it anyway. In 2011, The Lone Ranger was in production when the budget got so far out of control that Disney shut the whole thing down. They looked at the numbers and decided the movie wasn't worth the risk. That was the right call. But then some changes got made, some costs came down, and Disney changed their mind. The movie went ahead at $215 million. And the problem with that number is simple. This was a Western, and Westerns barely sell overseas. At that price, The Lone Ranger needed to be one of the biggest hits ever made just to turn a profit. It made $260 million worldwide. And less than 2 months after it opened, Disney announced they expected to lose up to $190 million on it. After 3 straight years of Disney, the biggest flop of 2014 came from the other end of the business entirely. On paper, a new Oz movie is a smart bet because everyone on the planet already knows what Oz is. The catch is that they know it from the 1939 Wizard of Oz, and so whatever you make gets compared to a classic that people still love. So in 2014, we got Legends of Oz, an animated movie that cost $70 million. And you can forget the comparison to the classic because this one had bigger problems. The animation looked cheap. $70 million, and it looked cheap. And the company releasing it was Clarius Entertainment, a small distributor that didn't last long in the business. A distributor's entire job is getting a movie into theaters and letting people know it exists. And they just didn't have the resources for that. It made $21 million on that $70 million budget. And the original wasn't the problem here. This thing would have flopped either way. By 2015, Hollywood had already learned this lesson twice. Steven Spielberg himself made Hook, a live-action Peter Pan movie, and even that one underperformed. Then somebody tried a straight live-action Peter Pan in 2003, and that one flopped. People just don't pay to see live-action Peter Pan. So naturally, in 2015, a studio spent $150 million to find out a third time. The movie was called Pan, and the idea was an origin story. How Peter became Pan. But the marketing never gave anybody a single new reason to show up. The only thing that got people talking was the casting, and not in a good way. There was this whole controversy about how the cast wasn't diverse enough. It made $128 million worldwide on that $150 million budget, and Disney clearly took notes. When they finished their own live-action Peter Pan remake, they didn't even bother with theaters. It went straight to Disney+. Studios always wait until after a movie comes out to admit they lost money on it. That's just how it works. You don't call the game before it's played. With this one, Paramount made history. 3 months before the movie had even opened, they announced a $115 million write-down on it. And then the movie came out and proved them right. It cost $125 million to make. It brought back $64.5 million worldwide, barely half the budget. And look, the movie is exactly what it sounds like. A kid's movie called Monster Trucks. It even has its defenders. One critic praised how completely it commits to a premise that was conceived by a child. She called it winsome and unapologetically fun. Warner didn't want one King Arthur movie. They wanted a whole cinematic universe of King Arthur movies, and that meant everything depended on this first movie working. The first sign of trouble was the release date. Legend of the Sword was supposed to come out in July 2016, and then it got moved, and then it got moved again, bouncing between 2 different 2017 slots. Now, a delay isn't automatically bad news. Sometimes the studio moves a movie to protect it. But when a date keeps sliding like that, it can also mean the studio has stopped believing. We'll never know for sure which one this was. What we do know is that the date they finally picked was a killer. King Arthur opened 1 week after Guardians of the Galaxy 2. So a movie with a generic marketing campaign and a year of delays behind it walked straight into a Marvel sequel. It cost $175 million and made $148 worldwide. The whole cinematic universe ended right there, 1 movie in. There was a recipe that had never failed before this movie. You take a big fantasy novel, you get Peter Jackson to write the adaptation, and you release it in December. That recipe gave the world the Lord of the Rings movies, and those made unbelievable money. Mortal Engines had every piece of that formula in place except one. When Peter Jackson did Lord of the Rings, he was adapting Tolkien, stories half the planet already knew and loved. Mortal Engines was based on some books most people had never even heard of. Nobody was out there waiting for this one, and that single missing ingredient cost them badly. It opened in December 2018 and made $83 million worldwide. The loss came to $174 million. To get how bad this one was, you have to remember the timing. 2019 was the best year superhero movies ever had. Avengers Endgame came out and broke every box office record across the planet. $1.2 billion global opening weekend. Superhero movies had never been bigger, and it looked like they couldn't lose. Then Dark Phoenix came out a few months later. It was the next X-Men movie. It cost $200 million, and it made just $252 million worldwide. In the United States, it made $65 million. Not on opening weekend in its entire run. Older X-Men movies made more than that in their first 3 days. When the accounting was done, Dark Phoenix had lost $133 million, and it stood as the lowest-grossing X-Men movie ever released. There's no 2020 here because for most of that year, the theaters were closed. So we picked things back up in 2021 when the studio started releasing big movies again. But they were nervous about it, so they hedged. A lot of the big releases that year went into theaters and onto streaming on the same day, and a lot of people stayed home to watch them. Disney had a $200 million jungle adventure ready to go with Dwayne Johnson and Emily Blunt. And then they made one decision that basically guaranteed it could never earn that money back. The same day Jungle Cruise hit theaters, Disney put it on Disney+. Pay an extra fee and watch it at home day one on your couch. And a lot of people did exactly that. Jungle adventure movies usually make their real money internationally. The Mummy earned a fortune out there. Jungle Cruise couldn't even crack 100 million outside North America. It made 220 million worldwide. Disney's loss came to about 151 million. There's one kind of movie that family audiences keep refusing to pay for, and that's the animated sci-fi action. Disney learned this all the way back in 2002 when they released Treasure Planet over Thanksgiving weekend. It bombed hard enough to lose them tens of millions of dollars. So in 2022, Disney spent $180 million to learn it again. Strange World was another animated sci-fi action, and they even gave it the same Thanksgiving release date. Now, most families never actually got the chance to reject this movie because most of them never heard of it. The marketing was basically non-existent, and they just never turned this thing into an event. So it opened soft, word got around, and that was that. It made $73.6 million worldwide. That's less than Treasure Planet made 20 years earlier, and that's before you even touch inflation. The loss came to $147 million. Marvel Studios went 15 years without a box office flop. Whatever they put out, people showed up, and then came 2023. It started with Quantumania, which got some of the worst reviews any Marvel movie had ever received. That summer, they put a show called Secret Invasion on TV, and the reaction to that one was even worse. So by November, when the Marvels came out, a lot of people had simply had enough. There was so much Marvel on TV by that point that keeping up with all of it felt like a part-time job. And then the Actors Union went on strike, and while the strike was on, movie stars weren't allowed to promote their films. So the Marvels went into its opening weekend with its 3 leads sitting at home. It made $206 million worldwide on a production cost of $219. The final loss came to $237 million. In 2019, Joker made over $1 billion. No R-rated movie in history had ever done that, and nobody at Warner saw it coming. So of course they made a sequel. There was just one problem though. Nobody asked for it. The first Joker told a complete story. People watched it, said, "Great, we're done here," and moved on with their lives. Even so, a month before release, the tracking looked strong. Projections had it opening at over $100 million in North America alone. Then it premiered at the Venice Film Festival, the reviews came back mixed, and for a solid month before opening day, all the talk around this movie was toxic. And when it finally opened, people hated it even more than the critics did. It got some of the worst word of mouth ever recorded for a comic book movie. It made $206 million worldwide. That's an 82% drop from the first one. And the lost projections ran as high as $200 million. American studios don't have to show anyone their books. But Disney shot Snow White in the UK for the tax breaks, and to get those tax breaks, you have to set up a local company that files public financial disclosures. So for once, we know exactly what a Disney movie cost. The real number was $410 million all in. And while all that money was going out, the controversies were already piling up. Rachel Zegler gave interviews criticizing the original 1937 movie. Then the first trailer came out and the CGI dwarfs looked so creepy, it became one of the most hated videos in YouTube history, with over 1 million dislikes. Zegler kept making political comments on top of that, and the whole circus ran for 2 years before a single ticket went on sale. When it finally opened, it dropped 70% in its second weekend. Even Dumbo never dropped that hard, and Dumbo spent a while as the worst live-action flop Disney ever had. To break even, Snow White needed somewhere around $700 million. It made $205. That's less than 30 cents back for every dollar Disney spent. The estimated loss is at least $170 million, probably a lot more. I don't know if a bigger flop is coming this year, but for now I'm calling it. This is a movie every studio in Hollywood had a chance to make, and for 17 years, all of them said no. The project sat around for almost 2 decades until Amazon finally picked it up and spent $200 million on it. And you can see the logic. Mattel had just watched Barbie turn one of their toys into a billion-dollar movie, and they wanted that feeling again. It opened with 29 million domestic and 54 million worldwide. And there's one number in the exit polling that explains the whole flop. Only 4% of the opening night audience was under 12. This was a movie built on a toy brand, and the kids who actually buy toys didn't come. Who did come was adult men. Yep, I just said that. 68% of the audience, mostly guys in their 40s who remember the cartoon, and there just aren't enough of those guys to pay back a budget this size. Right now, it's sitting at 113 million worldwide. Break-even is around $500 million. It's not getting there.